Morning. This is Laurie Clarcq. This morning I happened to be in Auburn Hills at the Teachers Discovery Center. It's very exciting to be here. And yes, I did walk around up and down all the aisles looking at all the exciting things that are here. I'm very excited to be working with Teachers Discovery and Voces Digital on this particular program. I don't know if you've had a chance to see any of the other webinars. If you haven't, check out the Facebook page. You can get a ton of information about where to find all of the webinars in the series, and make sure you do that because they've been terrific. Today's webinar is Ready for a Restart? I don't know about you, but I do know that a lot of teachers at this time of the year are starting to lag in energy. The weather's starting to change, the honeymoon period has worn off, and people are starting to ask themselves a lot of questions. And we're going to try and help you out with that so that you're not asking yourself when you get up in the morning these kinds of questions. We don't want you to think that it's too early. There's too many great things going on, but we do understand how this feels. Trust me. So what starts to happen is things slow down just a little bit. The excitement wears off and the questions start to pop up. And one by one and little by little, we start asking ourselves the questions. Sometimes the questions come from our own insecurities or our own lack of experience. Sometimes the questions come from watching too many other teachers on Facebook. And sometimes the questions come because you're dealing with 25 to 35 different personalities in a class. And it's hard to know, it's hard to gauge how everyone is doing. So let's take a step back for a minute and take a look at what we're trying to do. Teaching with comprehensible input is about these 5 basic points. And they don't necessarily have to be in this order, but I believe that if we approach them from this order, you're more likely to see the acquisition that you want to see. So starting at the top, we always want to focus on comprehension. We want to key into student interests. We want to make sure that there's interaction happening. And there's a lot of ways that interaction can happen. In the very beginning with novice level classes, you do need to make sure that the interaction is between the teacher and the students, because the teacher is the primary source of quality comprehensible input. Occasionally, we're going to have our students interacting with each other, but more important, we're going to have students interacting with ideas using the target language. When we're able to set students up for success so that they can interact with confidence, and when they stop thinking about the language and start using the language to think about life, that's when acquisition kicks in. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at some strategies that'll help us build on comprehension, building on student interests, making interaction successful, focusing on success, and how acquisition is happening behind the scenes, so you can be sure something good is going on, even if you can't pinpoint how and where it's happening. The more you know about comprehensible input, the more you can start to see the areas where acquisition is going on, and that's where we're headed. So we want to make sure that we understand some good questions. And if you haven't had the chance yet to educate your students and parents, this is the time to do this. Starting over doesn't mean you have to go all the way back to the beginning and start the year over. It doesn't mean you have to restart the content. Starting over means you walk in today and you add the pieces that you need in order to keep going in the right direction. It's resetting the course. You know that you have used your GPS enough times that if you make a wrong move or traffic forces you to miss a right turn, you hear the GPS recalculating. Well, that's all we're doing here. We're recalculating and sort of getting back on track, because by this time in the year, there are so many things that can get us off track. So let's start with the basics. What is language acquisition? If you jumped into using CI and you haven't really had a chance to ask yourself, do I understand this? This might be a good time to do that. Or if you think you do, but now that you're using it in action, you're beginning to wonder, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Is this how it's supposed to be working? Then this is a good time to sit back and look at a few resources and try to figure out, what is this acquisition deal that I've been trying to make happen in my classroom? There are so many resources out there. So first, take a look at the webinars that Teachers Discovery and Voces have available for you. When you identify someone, a presenter that you really resonate with, check out their blog, check out their webpage, and they will have a lot of information exactly about what is language acquisition. But most of us go back to Dr. Stephen Krashen's research when we want to understand language acquisition. And the nice thing about that is Dr. Krashen has all of his information available for free on his website. So you can Google that and find out that information. But for us, because we're sitting right here and I don't need you to pause and do all of this, the bottom line is this: language acquisition means there are two parts to the brain. There's the mind that's actively, consciously focusing on doing things. And then there's the brain that just does what it is programmed to do. Nobody is making you think in order to breathe and have your heart beat. I mean, you can force yourself to think about breathing, but that would be the mind. When you don't think about breathing, but you actually breathe anyway, that is the brain. And that's the part of us that actually can acquire language without consciously thinking about it. So if you compare language acquisition to sort of this concept of it's a natural bodily process that happens, when you concentrate on it and focus on it, that's the mind, and that's actually language learning. That does not bring us the long-term effects that we want to see. What we want to do is create a situation in the classroom that makes acquisition inevitable. In other words, to put students in a situation in which their brain, without them having to think about it, collects all the pieces of the language, sorts it out, and then is able to put it back into a form that down the road they will be able to output. In truth, the real goal of language acquisition is not to produce language. It's to be able to think in the language. Because once the students can think in the language, then the output will come naturally without any problem. I think it's really important to find a way to explain this information to students. If you want to use the example that I just played, or if you want to play that for them, go right ahead. Feel free. I think that we're also looking here at Voces to putting out some information for you that you can then share with your students, little clips or explanations that you can share. So look for that in the future. right, let's try this again. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I believe everyone can.
I'm hoping that they can hear me now.
Yeah.
All right. So apparently, no, you did not lose connection. Hi, Christy. I pushed a button I shouldn't have pushed, and apparently I've just been talking away without anyone being able to hear me. So, Erin, would you like me to go back?
You go back maybe like just
Quickly.
Yeah.
All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to,
Everyone can hear you now.
oh, yay. We're going to go back and do this quickly. Sort of. I'm warmed up now. So, are you ready for a restart? Welcome. This is Laurie Clarcq, and I'm at Teachers Discovery, and very excited to be here. Is this on your mind? Are students trying to make you feel like you don't know what you're doing? Are students feeling like they don't know what you're doing? Are you all ready for the first possible long break? We're here to help you. We know this is the time when the questions start popping up into your head, especially if you're watching videos of other teachers or you're reading blogs from other teachers and you are wondering all kinds of things. All right. And now we're hoping that you can hear us. If you can't, could you post that? So that would help us to make sure we're taking care of any errors on our end. So things you might be wondering, am I talking too much? Are my kids too quiet? Why won't they stop talking in English? How will I get through the syllabus I'm supposed to this year? And is this working at all? I know you've started to give assessments, and maybe what you're seeing on your assessments is not what you were hoping to see. So let's take a look at some 5 key elements that we need to pay attention to in a comprehensible input-based classroom. None of these are new. All of these are things we look at in any classroom, but what we're going to do is take a little focus, shift, and see what we're expecting in a comprehensible input-based classroom. Comprehension is clear. We're going to focus on student interest. We're going to make sure there's the appropriate kind of interaction. We're going to focus on success and head towards success. And we're going to look for examples of acquisition. So under comprehension, let's take a look at a few things quickly. The first one is, what is language acquisition? If this is not clear in your head, you want to make sure that you take a few minutes, do a little research, and Google what is language acquisition. There's a lot of great information out there, and we will try to post some links for you so that you can check and get your own reading done. But bottom line, language acquisition is this. You basically have 2 parts to the brain, the kind that works consciously on things and the part that takes care of things subconsciously or unconsciously. In the classroom that I grew up in for language, everything was about the conscious brain or the mind. My mind was told to focus on things, and if I studied with my mind and if I practiced in my mind, then I would eventually be able to use the language. But the truth is that language acquisition doesn't occur in the mind. Language acquisition occurs in the brain. It occurs in those subconscious, unconscious processes that my body already knows how to do. So what we need to do is to make some changes in the classroom so that that part of the brain is called into action. The students need to understand as well that the subconscious or unconscious mind is working here, because their brain is doing the work doesn't mean that their mind recognizes it. So it may not look or feel to them like their brain is working hard, when in reality, unconsciously, behind the scenes, the brain is sorting through all of the comprehensible input, and it's putting all of the pieces in a structure and organizing them for meaning and for structure, so that when it's time, the student will think in the target language and then be able to produce in the target language. Because language acquisition is not about using memorized phrases in order to communicate. It's about the brain helping itself to think in another language. And in order to do that, the number one thing the brain needs is comprehensible input. Now, Dr. Terry Waltz refers to this as comprehended input, and I think it's important to make the distinction. When Dr. Krashen first began to speak about this concept, he used the term comprehensible input to mean what students comprehend, or what Terry calls comprehended input. Those endings are important, though, because teachers have come to think of what students understand, okay, as a different thing. What teachers think of in comprehensible input is what students should be able to understand. Now, as a teacher, I totally get that. If I've used something and refocused on it and talked about meaning and used it over and over again and my students responded properly, it's really possible, okay, that I think, yes, it's comprehended because I think it's comprehensible. When in reality, the only way to know if it's comprehended is to check with the students. And so we're going to talk about that as we go through. You also want to communicate this to the students. The term comprehensible input literally means you got it. You know what it means. This is really important for them to know and to be reminded of on a regular basis. And then the next thing we want to take a look at really quickly is communication. Language needs to be used communicatively, or in other words, to deliver a message. If language isn't being used to deliver a message, then the brain will not process it in the form of acquisition. In order for acquisition to occur, there has to be a meaning to the communication that is happening. So we want to show them very, very clearly what communication is going to look like in our classrooms, because we're going to set up communication so that acquisition occurs. And that communication may look a little bit different than what they think communication is. They think you can watch TV, use your phone, and still communicate in the living room at the same time. That is not exactly what we're looking for in the classroom, and we need to be super clear about that. All right. Communication is actually about one of the other words that we see on our 5 important pieces, and that is interaction. What is interaction? And again, you would be surprised that students have very little idea about what interaction is. The reality is that cognitively, interaction changes as children grow. So the interaction that they are capable of and that they desperately need when they're 2 is going to be different when they're 6. It's going to be different when they're 8. Now, if you've taught middle school and you've ever had a toddler, you'll remember that toddlers and middle schoolers sometimes need the same kind of interaction. Right? They may cycle back to the kind of interaction they needed when they were younger. And that's important to know. What kind of interaction is important and what kind will help? The interaction that makes a difference is when it's very clear to the student that the communication is happening with them. They're not listening in. They're not eavesdropping. It actually involves their mind, and we want them to think about, okay, we want them to consciously think about a topic, not consciously think about the language. And so we have to create activities for the classroom in which we interact using comprehensible or comprehended input in interactions about issues and topics and activities that they are interested in. All right. So in order to make that happen, let's step back a little bit and take a look at your rules or your expectations. I'm not sure which ones you call them in your classroom. When you have set up a clear set of expectations or rules, acquisition will happen more easily. Why? Because you can interact with people when they're paying attention. If people aren't paying attention, then it's really difficult to interact with them. The second piece is that Dr. Krashen's theories revolve strongly around the concept of the affective filter. And when students understand how the affective filter works, they have a better understanding of several things in your classroom. So the first rule that I usually start with, and I know that several other teachers do too, is to listen with respect in order to understand. Now, this is not something that students are new to. They have been in school for a number of years. They know that these are the rules. They know that this is how they are supposed to behave. They may not know, though, why it's so incredibly important in a language acquisition classroom. And so we really have to explain to them why this makes a difference. Now, the younger your students are, the more often you know you need to go back to the expectations. Well, the truth is, everyone needs that, even adults. When I come to a faculty meeting, I sadly sometimes need somebody to remind me that this is not the time to chat with my friends and check my email, especially if the topic at hand is really vital. But my go-to behavior is get as much done in the time you have as possible. So even though I know that the rule is to listen with respect in order to understand, my behavior doesn't always reflect that, and I need the reminder. The same for the kids. They often need the reminder, this is our goal today. The rest of their day doesn't look like this. So for them to automatically walk in my door and sit down and have this pop up as a natural behavior without a reminder, I think is expecting a little too much of them. But I forget that. So I need to build into my routine, all right, a series of situations or a series of activities or places in which we remind each other of this information. I could do it with a sign. I could do it with a do now, or I could do it with an activity in which we actually go back and review these. But I promise you that every minute or two that you use to refocus them on what we're doing and how we're doing it is absolutely worth it. Now, truthfully, this is sort of 3 rules in 1. Listening. Listening. Do they know what listening looks like? Do they know what listening means? Or do they think listening means putting their head in your direction and nodding at the appropriate moments? So occasionally we clarify for them what it is that means. This is an old rule from primary elementary school, but it is still important. And I think it's very, very, very important at any time in which we want clear communication to exist and trust to develop. When one person speaks, the rest of the class is silent. Silent. And we have to remind them that whispering is not silent because they so badly want to communicate with each other about things that they forget that silent means nobody else says anything. And this actually takes a lot of practice for some classes. In our culture, when the person speaking has something important to say, everyone sort of turns towards the speaker to acknowledge that the speaker has something of importance and to designate that we are paying attention. This is how speakers understand, right, that their listeners are paying attention. Now, you and I know that you can face someone, you can actually make eye contact with them and still not listen to what they're saying, but it's very much harder. And so we want to make sure that we remind the class that this is the appropriate protocol in our room. Okay, so comprehension means you absolutely and totally understand what is being said. When you have to physically act that out, when you physically have to be quiet, when you physically have to turn in that direction. And I'm not requiring kids to make eye contact. For some kids, that's a much more difficult thing to do. So just turn in the direction of the speaker so that speaker knows that you are tuned in to what he or she is saying. I think also that wakes up your interest. It sort of naturally cues you into what's going on. If I'm facing my friend, I'm much more likely to talk to my friend and listen to my friend. If I'm facing the person in class who's speaking, I'm much more likely to tune in. Listen with respect in order to understand. This one also needs to be defined because what is respectful in one community may or may not be respectful in another community. So you want to have a short conversation with your students about what it looks like in your community. Does it mean using a certain tone of voice? Does it mean asking questions if you don't understand? Does it mean, making a verbal response if somebody says something? You want to make sure they understand what respect is. And this is an ongoing piece. At any time during class, you need to be able to stop the class and say, is there a more respectful way we could say this? Not necessarily to say that was disrespectful, unless you have that kind of relationship with your kids, but to say, let's practice here for a minute. Let's practice using this same term because it's an important thing to say, but with a little bit more respect so that everybody would be willing to listen to it. Do you want to know what respect is? Because that may be different in their mind than it is from yours. For me, it means that I am simply going to listen in order to understand. Okay? Respect means I'm not going to show you impatience or frustration or anger or judgment. And that's a whole lot easier if I practice listening without an emotional reaction. That's really difficult for me, okay? My brain likes to tack on emotions and reactions, but it's something that you can practice. What you're listening to is someone else's opinion and someone else's words. Everything that happens around you does not demand an emotional reaction. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later and how we can work with that with kids. You can see that if we are paying respect that to other people, that it's easier to understand them. It's less difficult to misunderstand them. And that if we are listening with interest, we are less likely to respond with frustration. And that the interaction can continue because we don't want to walk out the door and the other person doesn't get frustrated with us because they are reacting. All of that is going to add up to success. And when success is there, acquisition is going to happen. Because that last piece, listening in order to understand, again, is something that students don't actually realize they're supposed to be doing in school. Unfortunately, a lot of the way the school systems are set up in the past 10 years has not been about understanding. It's been about regurgitating and memorizing or filling in the blanks and not actually thinking and understanding. So when we are asking students to do this in class, we may really have to be literal with them about what this means and ask them questions about what they understand and let them know that we're going to continue to constantly do that. Those of you who've heard me speak before, you know that I have a phrase that I use, that communication and language is used in communication is putting a picture in someone else's mind and or heart. And getting the clear picture means you really understand. If my picture is clear and it's very close to what your picture is, then we understand each other. Because listening doesn't mean that I'm going to listen in order to get an answer, not in order to say the response I have planned. This is usually what I like to do. Somebody will tell me about a story, a situation in their school, and I want to fix it, or a friend has a problem and I just want to help them. And so I know what I want to tell them. I know what is best for them. And I'm just listening along, waiting for the pause so that I can jump in and give them the best advice I have. And actually, that's not my job. My job is actually to listen and understand where the other person comes from. It's not in order to fake being interested, which a lot of students are really, 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 really good at. They know how to make teachers think they're paying attention when in reality they aren't. Listening to understand means we're not listening in order to see who gets it and who doesn't. And it's not because it's someone's turn to answer. And this is a structure in the classroom that we need to reteach as well. If I am speaking with one person in an interaction, in other classrooms, that means they can just tune out and do their own thing until it's their turn to answer. And we're going to train them to understand that when one person speaks in our classroom, it's because this is interesting and important, and we all are going to pay attention. And we actually have to train them to do that. The example that I give to the students is basketball. If everyone on the basketball team is paying attention to who has the ball, and everyone is paying attention to what they're going to do if they get the ball, the team is much more likely to win because they'll be ready if the ball comes to them and they'll know the position they're in to put the ball in the hoop. But if you're on the basketball team and you're only thinking about guarding the guy that you're guarding or what you're going to have to eat after you play basketball, then if the ball comes your direction, you're not available to catch the ball. And if you're not available to catch the ball, then you can't catch the ball and make a basket. So we're all sort of part of the same team. And to be on the same team, we have to give whoever the speaker is the same type of attention. You may be tired of me coming back to this particular slide, but I want you to understand that everything that I'm talking to you about today comes back to this particular slide. And I did this on purpose because you should not be afraid to have things like this up in your classroom and constantly refer to them and go back to them so that students understand the why of what we're doing. Students deserve the opportunity to understand why they're doing what they're doing. The secret to this truly is that any child's first question word is why. The first one that they produce, which means it's the first one that they really acquire, is why. The brain has a natural instinct to want to know why something is happening. And so if we feed that need, if we let the brain know, if we let students know why we're doing what we're doing, they can relax. Their affective filter can go down and the brain can do the work of acquisition. All right, so you've got that part. Listen in order to understand can mean listen in order to understand the words that you hear. Listen in order to understand the speaker that you're listening to. And listen in order to understand, because if you understand why we're doing what we're doing, then acquisition is more likely to occur. Now, this is number 2, take care of problems, preferably before they arise. You may not remember what number 1 is. Number 1 was listen in order to understand. It's our rule. All right. And number 2 is take care of problems. I don't really know any other classroom that has this rule. And it may not be a rule that you have in your classroom, but I think if you think about making this a rule in your classroom, you'll see how useful it is. Now, truth is, it's October, people. And so a lot of these problems have already started to surface, maybe just a little at a time. So let's just go to take care of problems. The reason that I make take care of problems a rule in my classroom is 1, to remind me that when something happens, I can deal with it right away if I need to, and that I should deal with it right away if it's important to the class or to the student. It also is a clear message to students that I also expect them to take care of problems. The rule is not the teacher will take care of every problem that exists. Okay? The message is we all will take care of problems. And if the student has the capability of solving the problem, then that is clearly the student's responsibility. And I will ask them, how have you tried to take care of the problem first? It's sort of like the ask 3, then me sort of a situation, but it gives the impression that students have the tools and have the knowledge and have the confidence to take care of problems instead of running to the teacher. In order for students to take care of the problem, and in order for me to take care of a problem, we need to have some background information. We all need to know what the goal of the class is. We all need to know what the plan is for the class. We all need to know the logic behind what we're doing, and then we need to follow the plan. And this is how it works. So I know that this goal is acquisition, and I want it clear to the students that our goal in this class is acquisition, and everything we do is going to lead towards acquisition, because if they acquire a second language and they can be functional or microfluent, another one of Dr. Terry Waltz's terms, if they can be microfluent or functional in small ways, but very, very thoroughly and very effectively, in a target language, then they can change the world. They really can, not just their immediate world, but the entire world, piece by piece by piece, using a ripple effect. And acquisition is the way to get the language in the brain that they need to do. So now they need to know the plan. All right? They know the plan. We're going to interact as much as possible using comprehensible, and compelling input. And that's the logic behind it. Because if the plan is to use input, the logic behind it is if we use it as often and as much as possible, and it's comprehensible and compelling, then the acquisition will occur. So now we have to follow the plan. What is the plan? To do this as much as possible, as often as possible. When we know that this is the plan, right, they know that when they come into the class every single day, this is our goal. It's about the goal of being able to communicate. That happens when you get language through acquisition. The plan is to get them as much comprehensible input as possible, as much as possible, as often as possible. So every activity we do is designed to do that. So we get up every day, we come to the classroom, we have prepared all of these things, we have trained our students in this direction, and then guess what? Problems still show up, especially at the beginning of October. So here's what we do. We address the problems using the logic with the plan and the goals in mind. If we simply address the problems because they're there, we aren't helping our students. If we address the problems as they come up with the ideas that we have in mind about our classroom, about acquisition and about changing the world and about comprehensible input, and all of our responses go through that particular filter, we not only take care of the problem as it occurs in the classroom, we take closer steps to acquisition. This is the first problem that shows up. Now, I would love to believe that we all can get to October without anyone having a behavior problem. But my guess is that somewhere along the line, some behavior problems have already turned up. Just think for a minute, just in case it takes you a moment. I mean, some of you are in a better situation than others. Some of you are really lucky and haven't had too many. But think of, try to think of more than one type of behavior problem that turns up. Now, for some people, a person appeared in their mind. A student jumped right into their mind. One, because that behavior that student exhibits is really taking over and being frustrating for everybody. Or that one student may have a series of behaviors, several behaviors that can be frustrating. In addition, we're people connected. It's exactly where we are. And so we have a tendency as teachers, when we think of problem, to go to the people that bring those problems to our awareness. But the truth is, there are also problems that exist that aren't necessarily about the students. There are problems like too much work and too little time. There are problems like, I haven't figured out this computer system yet, and how can I do anything on a screen in front of my classroom when I can't even figure out how to turn it on yet? So we're going to set those kind of problems aside for the moment, and we're going to take a look at behavior. Now, the behavior can be an individual, or it can be a class. Lots of kinds of behaviors, some of which are appropriate at certain times and some aren't. A vast number of behaviors in the classroom come down to whether or not students have self-control. So I actually make this a goal for my students that all of us, myself included, are going to work on self-control. And we talk about the human need for self-control and how not having self-control can get us into all kinds of situations that eventually we're going to have to fix. And that life in general is easier if we have a stronger sense of self-control. Now, as you know, some kids have very good self-control and others don't. But we're going to try as a group to look at self-control as something everybody works at. Every single person works at. And we're actually going to talk about some strategies with students with self-control. So if you have students who struggle with self-control or have impulsive behavior, I tend to bring the strategies that work with those particular students in and have the whole class share them. So I may have little squishy toys for everybody in the class to have if they need something to help them keep control. I encourage students who are blurters to carry a Post-it note and a piece of paper so that they can jot down what the important thing is, so that they can make sure they get a chance to ask it when it's their turn and they don't forget. So we just bring in strategies and encourage everybody to use self-control strategies, including me, because it's really good if I can model things in front of them. The first thing that I try to model is breathing. Breathing is essential and core to life, and it's one of the things that can really help us with self-control. When the mouth moves faster than the brain, it's important to train the brain to breathe. You cannot inhale and talk at the same time. So one of the things we practice is inhaling before speaking. That little moment gives us the opportunity to remember that you need to also think before you speak. Breathing is a great thing to model. We start the class together with some simple breathing exercises. Anything that you may have learned in yoga or Lamaze or anywhere else may be helpful. Breathing strategies are being used all over the place with athletic teams. They've been used in drama for years and years and years. And it's a way to work together as a community and get students to practice listening. So you may see us put up some links about breathing exercises. Haiyun Liu at Ignite Chinese, I know, writes about them quite frequently. But even to do one breathing action or one breathing activity a day with students can help them with self-control. Signals. Signals are something I've used for a long time. I know these are not strangers to you. Many of you use signals or call and response activities with your students. This is, for me, the one behavioral control issue, okay? This makes or breaks my teaching. If I do not have a signal to use with the kids, I am an ineffective teacher. That's just the way it works for me. Signals can be spoken or silent. They can involve the target language or not, depending on the needs of your students. But a signal means this: you do something. The students notice that you're doing it, and then they have a designated response. So perhaps I just hold my hand up in the air. I just raise my hand, and as soon as students notice that my hand is up, they all start to raise their hand as well and be quiet and face me. That last piece is the most important. Just putting up your hand because my hand is up does no good. They must understand that being quiet and turning to give me their attention in silence is what I am asking for, because it means that something new is going to happen and everybody needs to be aware of it. It can be that simple. I really love to use phrases and words because I can tuck a little target language in there and create for the students some rejoinders that become natural parts of our conversation. Anybody who's seen me present knows that I start with a sneeze because in our culture, generally when someone sneezes, there is an automatic response. So I start by sneezing and have the students respond in the target language, turn towards me, and be silent. Now, well, the first day that I teach this, we do it 3 or 4 times in a row immediately because they actually need to understand I mean it. And then I might do it 10 times during the rest of that period just so that they get it. It becomes a little silly after a while, but that's all right. I want this to become automatic so that they don't even think about it. So that when I say X, they do Y, they're quiet, and they give me their attention. It helps us stay on task. It also allows me to give them the opportunity to interact amongst themselves in certain situations and get their attention back without wanting to scream, because it's very difficult. So this one piece is very important. Now, if you've been using signals or call and response pieces and you have sort of let them go, you forgot about them, retrain. Retrain yourself to do it. Make a big sign, put the word signal up there or put the signal up itself. Put it up in the back of your room, give it to a student in the back row, and when they think it's time for the signal, all right, they can hold it up for you and go, I think we need you to do this now. Get them on board for you. If you use a signal and you've been using the same one since the beginning, a very common one is for you to say, class, class, and then the teacher or the students respond, yes, yes. If that's the one you've been using now for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, think about changing it up. There are lots of different things that you can say and lots of suggestions that people have out there that you can use in your target language, regardless of what language you use, even if it's American Sign Language. We have a lot of teachers utilizing this. So again, Erin's making notes for me about things I need to get you some information about, and that will be one of them. All right. The thing about self-control, being able to be quiet when you need to, or turn when you need to, or stop even if you don't want to, okay, leads you to self-knowledge. And the more that we know about ourselves, the more likely we are to be able to control ourselves and take care of the problems that we have so that we don't fall into this pattern of lack of self-control. So we want knowledge, and we have to ask ourselves sometimes, what is the problem? However, when you ask a student, what is the problem? It sort of gives the impression that the child is the problem. And the truth is, the child is not the problem, even if the child is 18. Right? The truth is, the child has a problem. And having problems is not something that we like admitting in our culture. It's not a positive thing. And even if I say over and over to them, oh, everybody has problems, don't worry about it. I don't know. I've got a lot of reconditioning to do to get kids to think that it's okay to have a problem. So instead, I've gone to, what are you thinking right now? What are you feeling right now? And forcing them in a kind and gentle way, refocusing them into their internal place. Say, what is going on right now? Because if they have a problem, it's almost always because they need something or they want something. And for me to solve the problem, I need to know what they need or what they want or what they're thinking. Maybe they just have a fantastic idea that will save us all and get us all going in the right direction, and I need to give them the opportunity to share it. 90%, okay, that's maybe not the accurate guess, but a large percentage of the problems that we have in our classroom that look like a behavior problem are really the student thinking and feeling, I don't understand. Many of our students come in thinking that they are never going to be able to do this course. Either that's just an assumption they made because they're not generally good at school, or it's something assumption they've made because they've heard so many people say, I took a language and now I can't use it. All right, let's see if I can click the right button here. I don't understand also feels like I can't do this, which also feels like I'm stupid or I'm useless. Those feelings smack up an affective filter so high that the behavior becomes so anti-cooperative that students can't be where we are. What does it come back to? It's the words we've been looking at about comprehension. So we need to make sure that comprehension is as clear as possible. All right, we want to remind students how to get good comprehension. And we want to make this as easy for them as possible. So there's some quick and easy things we can think about. Choose and use high-frequency comprehensible language. We have to constantly check, are we doing this? Is this really comprehended by my students, or am I just thinking it's comprehensible? We have to make safe space for students to be confused and express confusion. And the best way to do that is to model it yourself. If something is going on and you are confused, modeling that honestly out loud with the confidence that you can solve the problem in front of your students. Now, if you just are constantly saying you're confused, all right, they may very well see that as a weakness and try to take advantage of it. But if the message that you're giving out is, I'm confused and I'm pretty sure I can solve this, let me take a moment. I need a moment to think. Or I need some assistance. Or I can't figure it out by myself. How many people can help me? In a confident tone of voice, so that you're expressing confusion, you're expressing an inability to fix something, but the confidence and the desire to fix it. And the very last and most important thing we can do, and I know this is somewhat controversial, is to check for comprehension. If we've already done 1, 2, and 3, we still have to do 4 because students have been trained to look like they understand when they don't. They've been taught this is the right thing. So I have some examples that I will, excuse me, share with you. Not too much at this moment because there's only 3 minutes left, but I promise I have thought of them and I'll give you the write-up for this. But basically the concept is I'm saying something to my students and I want to check for comprehension. I can ask them some questions in their own language, in their first language, especially if they're novice students or it's a new complicated structure or vocabulary. And I don't just have 1 or 2 questions. I have a lot of different questions I can ask. The question is, how many of them do I ask and how many students do I ask before they start throwing things at me? I have to decide that. How confused is the group? What kind of comprehension do I need to check? And when do I need to stop checking for comprehension and go back and make sure they know what it means by showing them or telling them? Okay? That is a practice that as you get better at it, you'll be more confident. And you have to tell the kids, this is something I'm trying to do. So we want feedback from our students. Those people who tend to ask, show me a thumbs up if you get it, a thumbs down if you don't, sort of a thumb going sideways if you sort of get it. You have to be sure that your students are being honest with themselves and honest with you. And that takes some time. To really be able to get to that point. It also takes some time for them to trust that you're not going to belittle them and their classroom mates aren't going to belittle them. So this is something we go back and reteach over and over and over again. You can also ask the questions in the target language. Okay. And when you do this, you give a very, very strong message, and that is that every student matters, not just the ones who know the answers to the questions. Because for most students, this is what they believe. The students who matter to the teacher are the ones who get the answers right to the questions. And when you make sure that everyone understands, you're making the point that everyone matters. You're letting them know that the core or the main idea of an utterance is of primary importance. This is what the brain does first. So this is what you're going to ask about first. Did you get the main idea? What do you think this is about? They get to know that that's important. But if you can understand the details of something, that's what makes it interesting. And that's what helps make the picture be clear. And so the brain goes for the details second. They go for the brain automatically, subconsciously goes for the main piece first, or things that are interesting. And it latches on to them. And it's usually the details that are interesting to the student. Right? The last and most important thing it communicates is that it happens. And it can and should be addressed with grace if we choose to do that. All right. So we want to make sure that we take care of this problem first. And we can do that by delivering clear language, using comprehension checks, and using them in such a way that they don't get exhausted and frustrated. All right. Really quickly, because time is short, I'm going to point out that there are also stages, and I think this is helpful for students to know, and you feel free to screenshot this, or we can put it in writing for you. I let my students know early on that there are actually stages of recognition and comprehension that their brain goes through that they don't see. And I, as a teacher, am going to try to see that and recognize that. So I heard it, but I don't recognize it. In other words, I know you said wah, 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 but I have no idea what you're talking about. Stage 2 means I heard it. I heard you say azul, but I have no idea what azul means. But if you say to me, what did I just say? I can say azul. I just don't have any idea what it means. And that's the third stage. I saw it and I heard it and heard it, and I think I pretty much recognize it, and I'm pretty darn sure I know what it means. Okay? Stage 4 is when we need to go with the kids. We need to practice this in front of them, with them, and create activities that do this. I checked what I think it means with the context to see if I'm right. Now, the brain does this sort of automatically. If the teacher says something and the kids are really paying attention and it doesn't fit in with what they expect to hear, yeah, the brain will be like, what? This is what happens when you do something with the students in which what you say is ridiculous in their normal logic. So the sky is bright green today. Okay, they heard it and they recognize it and they're sure what it means. And now they're checking and they're not sure it's really what it means because the sky is not usually green. And stage 5 is the most complex. But guess what? Stage 5 is the thing we almost always test. And we don't let students know that stages 1 through 4 occur, that stages 1 through 4 are important, and that when we are assessing, we give that message by finding ways to either formally or informally, which is just as important, assess stages 1 through 4 as well. And frankly, that's probably a whole nother webinar, but I want you to understand that that happens with kids, that them not understanding means that they may be on stage 2 or 3. They just haven't gotten to stage 5 yet. And when all is said and done, and kids do understand, and they do communicate using the language, and you're able to do activities with messages, with meaning, you need to celebrate. If you're missing out on the celebration piece, then you're missing out on one of the best things going. There are lots of ways to do this, but the kids know this. If you are really glad that they are communicating, or if you really, really are impressed that they understand, you better say so or they're never going to know. So feel free. This is not always natural for some people. And my request is that you find a way that is natural and normal for you and your students. If it's not natural for your students to stand and applaud each other, and you don't think it's a comfortable thing for you, then don't do it. Find another way. If you don't think it's comfortable for your students, but you think you could talk them into it, then find a way to talk them into it and give them a celebration, not only because they understood, but because they were willing to try something new and to celebrate. One of the cool things about celebration is when you get your kids, to all snap their fingers for each other or bow to each other or whatever it is that you think it is to do to celebrate, you are teaching them that trying something that makes you a little bit uncomfortable can actually make your world a better place. And they need to know that in a classroom where they're trying to acquire a second language, because working in a second language in a second culture is all about putting yourself out there. And in a very small and subtle and joyful way, sharing in a celebration amongst our students is a wonderful way to do that. All right, I think I've hit my time limit here, as much as I would love to go on. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, reset things up, and come back to answer some questions. Thanks for being here.
We received some questions from different teachers, and I'm going to read some, and Laurie's going to answer. So first off, the question is, how do I avoid burnout? I'm exhausted each day, even on great days, and I fear I can't keep the momentum up.
All right. I think this is the number one question that people have right now. The first thing I want you to remember is that every year feels like this in October. So step 1, there's a piece of us that comes in roaring fast and prepared and rested from the summer. And then it hits us that we're actually giving out a lot of energy every day and bringing in a lot of energy from our students. For me, the example I use is the concept of Tuesdays. I know some people hate Mondays, but I love Mondays and I hate Tuesdays, because Mondays I'm rested from the weekend, and Tuesdays I'm like, oh my gosh, I have 4 more days to go, and I stayed up late last night, and it just doesn't work the same way. So 1, have faith that some of this is just kind of normal pattern. 2, you have to take care of yourself. You really, really do. And that message is coming on strong and clear everywhere we look. And I think actually that schools are starting to support teacher self-care. So look at any way that your school allows you to take self-care, whether they allow you to walk for a few minutes during your free period without getting reprimanded, or they're encouraging you to drink water, whatever they are encouraging, take them up on it, because the more that we follow what they offer, the more likely they are to offer it. But the challenge really is here in our own mind, in which we believe we have to do everything well, and we don't. Just slow down, take a deep breath, and relax. Comprehensible input teaching is about teaching in the long run. It's about teaching for the end of the journey. And right now, you just need to stay where you are and be focused where you are. Drink a lot of water, take your time, enjoy your students, and plan some activities in which you aren't generating all the energy, because by now there's a sense of structure and an understanding of the discipline routine. So reading is your absolute number one activity if your students are level 2 or above. And in all levels, my go-to is drawing. Have them read and draw and read and draw. You get to walk around and to see what they're doing, to check in. You can use their drawings that they hand in to create other assignments. And there's just something very therapeutic for everybody about drawing. And it lowers the need for you to have to give out this dynamic energy all the time. So that would be my suggestion there.
Nice. Okay, the next question is, I have a group of students who insist on speaking English. What can I do to encourage them to speak more Spanish?
All right, so step one, are they speaking English about whatever it is you're discussing in class? If they're not, if they're talking about the homecoming game, if they're talking about boyfriends and girlfriends, if they're talking about something that's happening in the next class, that's a different discipline issue. But it also means that perhaps the activity isn't drawing them in enough. So when I have a small group, just a targeted group, I try to find out what it is that interests them and make sure that over the next couple of weeks that an activity that we do really keys into their interests. If you did student surveys at the beginning of the year and then forgot you did them, this is the time to go back and dig them out and find out what those kids are interested in. If you did not do student surveys at the beginning of the year, do them now. It doesn't matter when you do a student survey. I mean, we sort of get this idea that if I didn't do it at the beginning, the kids will look at me strangely now. Absolutely not. Just tell them it's time for the survey. This is when I do it. And here, I need to know more information about you. And then you can sort of key in. It's also a good time to make sure that you have built in things in your program that they can say. So sometimes they're just excited about what's going on, but they don't have the target language to say what they want to say. So they go to the first language. So this is the time where you want to look at rejoinders. Make sure that you've given them things like, oh my gosh, or that's fantastic, or oh no, or that you've sort of built in ways to do that. And that those things are visible in front of them so that they have something to look at to know how to respond. The third thing is to make sure you build in ways for them to use those frequently so it becomes automatic. It's not going to be automatic. L1 is going to be automatic. So we need to build in some practice for that. And again, there's lots of great information out there on how to use rejoinders and build those in.
Nice. Cool. Okay, what's one thing I could do next week with my students that would build community and give us an opportunity to de-stress and relax while staying in the target language?
Songs, 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 songs. Music is the great communicator. And if you have a song that you can do at any age level, do it. If you are not somebody who uses music and songs, ask somewhere so that we can help you get the music that you need and the activities that will help you. Music is this incredible unifying force. Along with that, sharing any kind of story together is super uniting, and movie talk can do that in a really fun way. Movie talk is nice because you don't have to necessarily do all the talking. You could prep for movie talk with readings where they have a screenshot on the board of something in the movie talk and then a reading that goes with it. So you can do some oral interaction, but then you can also do some reading building up to the movie talk. And there's just something really cool about having watched a movie and a story together that builds community. The other thing I think is helpful are brain breaks. If you have not used brain breaks because you haven't had time to look at them, or you think you'll lose control of the class, or your kids are too old to do them, be brave. Give it a shot. Think of 2 that you want to try that you've heard about, and then just really sit down and figure out, how do I train them to do this? How can we do this and use them? If you have a signal, you can always get the class back together.
Mm-hmm.
If you have something planned afterward that they already know how to do and they're really confident with, then if the brain break isn't exactly what you thought it would be, it's okay. You've got an activity that's guaranteed to follow up. And remember, brain breaks are not like anything else. Nothing is always perfect the first time you do it. You might have to do the brain break for 2 minutes, and then the next time do it again, same brain break, and then maybe by time 3, then it's down.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get your kids used to brain breaks, then it's not a problem. But not all brain breaks are made in teaching heaven, and so you have to make sure that you teach it, you solve any problems that come up, and then in order to celebrate the success, you do it again.
Yeah, nice, cool. I love the idea of songs too. I mean, that's
that gets it in their head, and then the rest of the day they've got a song stuck in their head, so that's always a good thing.
Okay, and the final question, is there anything else I can do to regroup?
I think that one of the things that we forget that we can do is to take a look at the structure of our classroom day. On one hand, I mean, some of us have some crazy schedules, and if you are doing some really active things in every period all day long, and you set yourself up for that, you're going to be exhausted. Mm-hmm. If you can now that you know your schedule and now that you know your students, sort of alternate things so that, in the mornings you may be more up and running, but in the afternoon this week you're going to be calmer, and then flip it next week. That's helpful. It also may be that you have having a routine is super, super important. We tend to fall into 2 categories. We're either so structured that the kids are like, okay, it's 8:02 and 11 and a half seconds. We're now going to do this, and we know it. And you may need to loosen the structure and change it up a little bit so that they have something new. If they can anticipate everything you're going to do, it's not a good scene. Mm-hmm. That's when behavior problems tend to creep up. Also, if the other direction, if you're like me and you like to go with the flow, there are times when the kids are like, whoa, I don't know where we're going.
Yeah, where we're going.
And have we done anything this past 2 weeks? Because it felt like we were just coming in and having fun. Well, kids need structure, and they need to know how things are going to go during the period. So at the very least, do something every day at the beginning and at the end that creates a pattern or routine for them, so that they're starting to feel that. And then you too can see the progress from the daily routine that, wow, when we first started doing these particular items at the beginning of every period, they weren't so strong at it, but now they're stronger at it. Mm-hmm. And that sometimes helps too. So your schedule and your routines make a really, really big difference. If you're finding that you're having to do too much work to prepare, okay, then step back, look at your problem, and say, what can I do to make this easier? Can I make one PowerPoint and use it for the whole week? Mm-hmm. If you don't know how to solve that problem, go to a colleague or ask somebody, put out the question on a listserv or in somebody's blog or in an email to someone, because someone can always solve the problem if you can't. Yeah. And if that happens, go back and tell your students, I saw a problem, I saw a need, I didn't know how to solve it, I contacted somebody else, and this is what they helped me do, so that 1, they know why you wanted to change things, mm-hmm. because you saw a need, and 2, that somebody else helped you do it and you were gracefully able to incorporate that. Oh,
I love that. Awesome.
Just like I did when I couldn't get this program to run.
And so just so you guys know, if you saw the earlier live webinars, we had 2 because we had a little technical difficulty in the middle, but we will be editing that video into one, and it will be available on our YouTube channel. And I just want to thank Laurie for being here at Teachers Discovery. We've had a fantastic week. We visited different classrooms and just had some great conversations.
A lot of fun. And thank you to those teachers. That was amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Okay. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Have a good weekend.